Welcome to the Consistently Performance Podcast, helping athletes win the mental game. I'm Cassidy Preston. Today we got a great episode with Jim Reeves. He's got tons of experience as a former athlete, but now particularly training elite athletes and helping them get to the next level. So he's going to share some great stories. He's worked with players like Rick Nash and Patrick O'Sullivan, and really talk about their mindset, the routines that they have, that made them the very special and professional and elite athletes that they are. So enjoy today's episode. There's lots of great takeaways. We'll see you in the next one.
Campoli trying to clear it. Burrow shoots, scores!
All right, thanks for joining, Jim. It's definitely a pleasure to have you with us, and I know you've worked with a lot of elite hockey players and athletes, and as well we're pretty elite athlete yourself, and we both played at York University, so that's a cool connection we have. But I'd love just to get a quick start into like how you got into all the training and all the experience that you have, working with elite athletes, and just a bit more about your story, if you don't mind sharing.
Absolutely. For me, I grew up in a small town north of Toronto. It was actually kind of neat. We had the first couple of years of the Vaughan Kings organization. I was a part of that AAA situation. We had 13 members from my high school were the main part of, not the main part, but a good chunk of the team, which was, pretty cool coming from a small town and yet having, such a big chunk of the kids come from, basically farm country at that point anyways. Or I should say horse country. Just growing up, I played everything. I had exposure to a number of different sports and, really kind of excelled at a lot of them, hockey and baseball being the two that I really pursued to a higher level. From there, my 16-year-old year, I actually ended up tearing my ACL. Ran into some difficulties with at that point, it was a major surgery. And, you're out for a significant amount of time. I missed out on being drafted that year and, took about 2 years for me to get back on my feet playing again. And, following that, like you said, I ended up playing at York University for 2 years. And really just had an exciting opportunity to, pursue hockey to a higher level. And what was really cool was my minor midget coach. I played 2 years of minor midget. I played up a year, my first year. And my minor midget coach really kind of opened the door for me mentally in the game in terms of, it wasn't just about just going out and playing, but he actually opened the door to teaching myself and all the other guys on the team different concepts, strategies and individual skills versus team team concepts and changing things up in the middle of the game. And it really enlightened me to how important a coach could be in your life. It was really kind of cool. And, I actually ended up running into him with my wife. Well, it'd be about 10 years ago now. So that would have been 25 years out from playing for him. And it was really kind of neat running into him. He's still working in the OHL as a scout. Some old memories and stuff like that. So.
Oh, that's awesome.
Cool.
No, for sure. And I can also attest, coaches can have such a big influence. And, a lot of the research I've done and the work I do is also with coaches because, whether it's a physical fitness and dryland training coach or mental coach or hockey coach or sports specific coach is, they can have a huge impact positively or negatively on an athlete's trajectory. And so, they're big role models and have a lot of responsibility for helping athletes develop. So, it's always good to highlight that. And so I'm sure that probably sparked a bit of your interest in getting into kind of a coaching role and to what you do now. But thanks for sharing that part. I always can resonate with those kind of concepts. Keep going. So then what eventually led you right into to kind of what you're doing now?
Well, at the time that I got injured, kind of the place to go for your sports injuries care, it was called originally called the Bobby Orr Sports Injuries Clinic, and then it became the Alan Eagleson Sports Injuries Clinic at York University. track and field center there. And so I attended there, and both before my surgery, after my surgery, through my whole rehab. And what was really neat was, and I probably didn't even realize the impact of this until later, was sitting on the bed and watching athletes from every sport. I mean, I had Mitchell Wiggins, whose son now plays for the Timberwolves. He was an NBA player at the time. He was rehabbing, his injury, and Daniel Nestor was on the other table right beside me, and all these other like gymnastics and figure skating and hockey players, and every sport was there. And it was really kind of neat to see the people that wanted to succeed and see their mindset in terms of, yeah, they had a setback, or they were dealing with some difficulties, whether it was post-surgical or if it was just an ongoing maintenance issue that they were dealing with. Just to watch them, how hard they worked and how hard they wanted to pursue their dreams. And one of the things that was really, I had no idea at the time that I was watching this, but adjacent to the Alan Eagleson Clinic is the indoor track center there. And part of your rehab obviously is to work out. So I would transition from any hands-on work that the therapist that I was working with was doing, and I'd go into the track and field center, and I'd do my my lifts and squats and everything else that I was doing. And here I am, this skinny 16-year-old kid who is just being introduced to the weight room, has no idea what he's doing, and I'm getting bumped off the bench. I remember getting bumped off the bench press by this guy, 5'8" or 5'10", dark-skinned guy, absolutely jacked. And didn't even realize it, but I was getting bumped off the bench by Ben Johnson. And sitting back and doing my work on the sidelines and watching this track team, work out and do their thing, and to see what was eventually a world-class athlete. I think later that year he actually tested positive at the Seoul Olympics for the steroids. But what most people don't understand is that the boatload of hard work that went into that, making him a world-class athlete, and competing in a field where everybody was on steroids, and the whole, it was a polluted environment, but he was only leveling the game, I guess would be the best way to say it. But watching his coach, Charlie Francis, who's now revered as one of the best coaches in history for that sport, and the concepts that he would put into play, and reading later on, all the different things that he would do and how attentive he was to the science of coaching his athletes. And I really I guess over the course of that whole experience of being in that situation for 2 years, because I ended up having 5 operations on my knees over 2 years. And it was, it was just some really weird complications that came out of the original surgery. And so I was 2 years before I was really back playing competitively. And my first game on the ice was actually at the university level, transitioning from AAA midget, and then all of a sudden I'm playing university.
Wow.
But it was really kind of neat to see that whole progression of different athletes pursuing their dreams and seeing, and like I was there 5 days a week for almost 2 years, and the field never changed. Like, it was the same people there consistently every single day, doing their thing, getting their rehab, going through their motions, going through their routines, and it was a big part of their day. And I really kind of learned and understood that if in the world of pro sports or elite sports, world-class level sports, if you want to be there, you got to put the time in. You have to be willing to commit that much to it. You can't just kind of do it 3 days a week, or schedule some doing what you love to do, because a lot of what you did when you were in those situations, it wasn't love. Like, you're working hard on some of these these different exercises, and you're pushing yourself real hard. And my coach for a lot of that ended up being the athletic therapist that I was working with. It was just a matter of recognizing that I was being mentored by her, and being pushed along, and it was really kind of an enlightening experience for me as a athlete, seeing what it took to be a coach on a consistent basis, and taking in everything that the athletes around me were doing.
No, and I think that's so so key, and you really spoke to it well, like the concept of consistency, particularly about how you train. Because I know growing up and seeing some athletes, they train hard, but then they wouldn't train hard for a while, or like they train hard one day and then the next day they're like, oh, I'm not feeling it, and they wouldn't push themselves or show up. And it's that day in, day out, mindset and commitment. And, I know you spoke to it before, but like, showing up as a professional, right? And so, and that's pretty cool to be able to see that in all kind of, that's not just hockey, it's all sports. The elite athletes, they show up giving it a 10 out of 10, mindset and effort level, and attitude to their workouts, and consistently. Like obviously they have some rest days and times where they do recover, but they're, that's their level of commitment, and they show that, and that comes through. And to see that over a 2-year span, 5 days a week, is pretty cool. And so I'm sure that really kind of ingrained that key concept, which, then, is a huge lesson for any coach. And then trying to kind of pass on those lessons to athletes. And when you see that kind of in an athlete, it's, being able to foster it as well. So, yeah, I think that's key. You said how hard those athletes train and how consistently they train on those little details, and doing it day in, day out. It's kind of like gets mundane at times, right? And but they're dedicated to it, and that's that's a huge separator from everybody says they want it, but are they willing to take the action to that matches that, and that's what it takes. So I'm glad you shared that. I know you've got lots of other stories we'll get into as well, but no, those are probably pretty formative moments in your career, doing what you do now, and training athletes, and with Athlete Zone. So yeah, do you want to maybe speak to then kind of the next stages after that? Like I know you then start working with OHL teams and some different facilities, but just kind of wrapping up
Absolutely.
that bridge now.
Yeah. So I specialized in athletic therapy when I was in university.
Mm-hmm.
I got my kinesiology degree, and I
Mm-hmm.
finished working from an education standpoint. And then my first job was actually back at the same clinic that I went to as an athlete.
Mm-hmm.
So I got hired back. By that time, the lady that had Kelly, who was the athletic therapist that I had worked with, she was now the head of the clinic.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, the doctor at the time that ran the clinic was Dr. Michael Clarefield, who was the Leafs doctor. So
Mm-hmm.
I ended up getting some opportunities to work at his other clinic and sports medicine specialist in Toronto at Davisville and Young.
Mm-hmm.
And again, really just getting exposure to a whole level of athletes that were achieving at a higher level, and again, across a number of different sports. It was not just hockey. So
Mm-hmm.
as a therapist, I started working with, post-surgical patients, and I saw the good and the bad, and I saw the people, like you said, the ones that would, schedule an appointment, and then their next appointment in their mind had to be the following week.
Mm-hmm.
It was never the next day. It was never a daily thing. Or they would do their rehab stuff, on a day-to-day basis in-house, but they never took any ownership when they went home.
Mm-hmm.
And so I saw in real life, the repercussions of people who didn't do the work as well as the ones who did. And,
Mm-hmm.
the buy-in and the mindset that was available to, to people, and the success that came as a result of their efforts.
Mm-hmm.
So after working in the clinic, and I worked with a junior club at the time called the Caledon Canadians. And actually, you always wonder about your origins. The head coach of the Toronto Maple Leafs at the time was playing for that. Sheldon Keefe was one
Oh
of the
yeah.
athletes that was on the team. It was really kind of a real circle around. Just
Yeah.
ran into him probably 20 years later when he was coaching at Sault Ste. Marie, and,
Mm-hmm.
had some good talks with him at one of the OHL functions.
Oh, nice.
So I worked. I transitioned into working for the Sudbury Wolves.
Mm-hmm.
Worked there for a year. I worked in Belleville for 3 years. Had some great experiences in terms of, again, team success, and seeing elite athletes, and seeing, who the people that succeeded
Mm-hmm.
were, as opposed to the people that really had some a boatload of talent, but maybe didn't have the whole package.
Mm-hmm.
I remember we had in the year that I worked in Sudbury, we had probably one of the most prolific lines, certainly in that year, the strongest line in the league. They had Norm Milley, who was a huge talent coming out of I think it was Toronto Red Wings or the Nats.
Mm-hmm.
He was Sudbury Wolves' highest right wing. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
sorry, I got a puppy that's got to go outside.
Yeah, no worries.
So had a
Yeah.
um, so Norm was incredibly talented winger,
Yeah.
and if I was to categorize Norm, he was the last on the ice, first off.
Mhm.
Great guy socially. He was one of the most popular guys on the team, and he just really enjoyed his time in junior.
Mhm.
He would regularly have 3-4 points a night and be one of the most prolific scorers in the game.
Yeah.
And it was really fun to watch him play.
Yeah.
His left winger was Taylor Payette, and
Mhm.
um, played his junior career. He started out, he's a first rounder to the New York Islanders, and inched his way into created a spot for himself at the NHL level, and I think he played 11 years in the NHL. So carved out a real good career for himself.
Yeah.
And again, same thing, boatloads of talent,
Yeah.
worked really hard. And Taylor was the type of guy that did everything that he wanted to do to really help himself. So he would go out on the ice early, and he'd work on a shot after the game, or he'd do some extra work, stick handling and stuff like that. Team workouts, he was always there to do everything that he needed to do, and it was
Mhm.
really kind of cool to watch his progression.
Yeah.
But their centerman was, it was kind of a real neat experience for me, is to watch a kid who was first at the rink by several hours
Yeah.
and was an absolute leader in the dressing room. He ran the team's church or religious group. He
Mhm.
organized that. He was at the hospital all the time doing visits. He would go to schools. Like, his
Mhm.
day was honestly a 7 or 8 hour day, and we didn't
Mhm.
start practice until 4 or 5 in the afternoon.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And he would, he'd get to the rink early. He'd watch video. He was, constantly talking with the coaches, and he was the captain of the team, by
Mhm.
no surprise.
Yeah.
It was, I obviously, in junior hockey, you have multiple roles when you're working for the team. So we'd finish up, myself and my assistant, we'd finish up, clean up the dressing room, get the laundry on, get everything ready for tomorrow's practice. So if we got off the ice at, let's say, 5:30,
Mhm.
by 6:30, we were all done and ready to go.
Yeah.
And 7 o'clock would roll around, and there'd still be this one guy in the weight room, and he'd be working out every day.
Yeah.
And I had no problem. I'd stay, I'd spot him, I'd work with him on different
Mhm.
things, or I'd just let him do his thing.
Yeah.
Because he had needed no motivation whatsoever.
Yeah.
So as a 19-year-old, the next year, or sorry, then he was 18 that year. So as a 19-year-old, he didn't come back to the Wolves. He
Mhm.
was he actually made the Ottawa Senators as a 19-year-old. That was
Oh,
Mike
wow.
Fisher.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
Unbelievable to
Yeah.
see him and
Yeah.
succeed. And the comment that really struck me was, Brian Murray was the GM at the time,
Mhm.
and he said something to the effect of, and I'm paraphrasing, but he said something to the effect of, "We can't send this guy back.
Yeah.
Like,
Mhm.
he's ready."
Yeah.
You know, and it was really, when I think about everything that I saw that year, like, when you're in Sudbury, you're 2-3 hours away from your first bus stop,
Oh,
like
yeah.
your
Yeah.
first rest stop,
Yeah.
right? So your ability just to grab food before the game, or everybody else would come on board and they'd have a Subway sandwich, or
Yeah.
they something that their billet packed for them.
Yeah.
Mike would come on board with a cooler,
Yeah.
and every single road trip, and it wasn't a cooler just for before the game. He
Yeah.
had his post game meal packed as well.
Oh, yeah.
So he didn't take the pizza and the
Mhm.
the kind of $6 platter that the team would buy us after the
Mhm.
game. He
Yeah.
had made himself the meal, and it was just
Mhm.
the focus and the intensity on every single tangible element that was in his game.
Mhm.
He was so focused on being successful that it
Mhm.
just bled out of him. It was just like, you watch him, it's just like, man, like, why is this guy doing all this? And it was because
Mhm.
he had his list, and he was checking off every single thing that he needed to make sure it was done to be the most successful player he could be.
Yeah.
So really, there was no surprise when he succeeded and carved out, an absolutely amazing career.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think, the concept again that comes to mind, and that speaks exactly to it, is like, he's acting like a professional before he was, and then that's why he became a professional, like, and such a good professional. Like, he took it very, very
Yeah,
seriously, and wasn't just going through the motions, and definitely, you know, paying attention to the details, like all those little things, like packing his lunch, like, those little things, like it's, how he fills his time in his day, being as productive as he can, attention to detail. That's a great example and story. And, I was sharing another one a couple weeks ago, just like Robbie Schremp versus Corey Perry, right? So it's just like two very amazing OHL players, and one's gone on to an all-star level, and it's nothing against Robbie Schremp, but I heard a podcast with him on him just talking about how dedicated professional Corey Perry was. Like, and I know you've got lots of other stories like that you can share, but I think that will be probably that's a key thing. I'm sure you can touch a lot on it in different ways. But yeah, that's Mike Fisher's story is a great example of like acting like a professional before he was a professional. Like, you're not making much money playing the OHL. Like, it's cool, it's fun, but like you're just a kid still, playing, having fun playing high level hockey. It doesn't mean you're going to make a career out of it. Just like, his line mates, even, so they had decent careers in various ways, but compared to what he did, it's night and day compared to what a lot of guys did. And there's lots of guys that has like mediocre OHL careers and then go on to do, amazing things because, again, they did what Mike Fisher does, start acting like a professional. And that's, that's a big part to get into the next level. And that's, your mindset and your attitude around it. So I appreciate you sharing that story. That's fantastic. So,
What's really cool is a lot of those same, a lot of those same qualities pivot into, whether it's success in the same line of work. So,
mhm,
Mike's success in hockey, or you see other guys that maybe don't necessarily have that talent, but they do have that dedication and consistency and workload,
mhm,
tolerance, attention to detail, and they go into their own life, and
yeah,
they become a successful architect or a
yeah,
physician, or in
100%.
other lines of work that you know being successful as a hockey player is no different than being successful in any other
Yeah.
line of work. It's
Mhm.
it's your ability to be that, like you say, the professional before you're professional.
Yeah, 100%. And I speak to it a lot. Like, these are life skills, right? Like, what's your mindset? If you're going to do something, how are you going to do it? And kind of one of the, kind of overarching lines is like, how you do anything is how you do everything to a degree, right? And point being, like, you got to show up, and are you prepared for the road trip? Do you have your things? It's the same, in sport that way, as well as then your training and how he prepares mentally for his games and physically, and understanding the game tape. He's constantly preparing himself for things. And then be the same, if he had being an architect or studying for an exam. And you see guys are, they miss those connections, and they develop those habits where they're not taking it the same throughout their life. If you're going to do something, you might as well do your best at it. And that's what being professional is about. And that, like you said, definitely transfers into other areas of life. So no,
Mhm.
I'm glad you brought that up. Well, yeah, do you want to transition then into kind of like, what you're doing now with Athlete Zone, and started your own gym, and obviously trained in a lot of successful athletes, and maybe even speaking a bit to some of the the approach that you take. And I know the, like, functional movement's a big thing, but it kind of even just outside of just the mindset, but other additional training tips and kind of some of the routines and things that you preach and push on to the athletes and high level athletes you work with. So.
Well, one of the things that I really learned through my course as an athletic therapist, both in school and then transitioning into treating people, was kind of the idea that as an athlete, you need to do certain exercises to undo what the sport does to you.
Mm,
And really, that's what my version of training is. So
yeah.
you'll have a lot of guys that go into the gym and they pick up some dumbbells and they do flies and bench press and curls, and they'll do some squats if they're a little bit more understanding of what they need to perform on the ice.
Yeah.
But they they get to a certain level, but they only really graze the surface of making themselves better. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that I've always, when I first kind of had the opportunity to evaluate movement, is I took a course back in, I think it was 2002 or 2003, and it was this new concept that was coming out, taught by this guy Greg Cook and Lee Burton down in the States. It was called the Functional Movement Screen. And
Mm-hmm.
I went to a course, and I ended up going out for lunch with both of them, and really listened to these guys who were basically throwing the status quo out the window and saying that all these, testing on like isometric and kinetic testing on these machines, and that was how doctors and therapists were evaluating people and their readiness to go back to sports. And I remember kind of thinking back to my rehab and how little that impacted my ability to get back on the ice, and how much other things that my therapist at the time was giving me, and watching what the other athletes were doing, and simple, exercises where you're balancing on one leg and somebody's tossing a ball at you and you have to catch it, but you're off balance, and learning how to ground yourself to the floor through your hips, and to really create that stability in your posture and create that efficiency in the posture that you had. So going through this course and seeing how these guys were putting this functional movement screen together as a way to measure how efficient your body is. And that's basically the concept that it is. And it really struck a chord with me. But it was like, yeah, this totally makes sense as to why would you put fitness and performance on top of dysfunction, when if you created function first, you don't need to do that much more to be that much better. Like, if you're already an elite level athlete, you have some assets. If you want to be an elite level athlete, then you have to gain those assets in your game. But the economy of motion really stuck out as something. So way back then, like 2003, 2004, we started doing this functional movement screen as a part of working with my athletes. And over the years, looking at the idea of motor control, and the right muscles doing the right job, and the wrong muscles not overwhelming the right muscles, joint stability, and the presence or absence of motor control in the control of the body, and mobility restrictions are the three key concepts that the functional movement screen looks at. So if you look at your body, you've actually got a series of stacked alternating requirements at each joint. So your foot, you need an arch that's stable. You need an ankle that's mobile. You need a stable knee. You need a mobile hip. You need a stable lower back. You need a mobile rib cage, stable shoulder blade, but mobile shoulder, stable elbow, mobile wrist, stable hand, mobile fingers. So the body is a series of alternating requirements. So if your training doesn't complement that functioning of the body, you're basically spending time either working against the way your body needs to move, or you're not making the changes necessary to overcome a restriction. So as a skating athlete, if you don't use your hamstrings and your glutes in pushing off behind you, and you focus solely on your quads, and that's how you squat, you'll never tap into your true potential and the length of your stride. Because and as a result, you'll end up shortchanging yourself in terms of your skating efficiency, your economy, your stride length, your ability to be reactive to to change up real quickly, because you're using the wrong muscles to stop yourself and slow yourself down and turn. So it's those concepts within the game are significantly impacted by how you as an athlete move. And that's really the way that we go about our so what we've done is we deliver all of our programming online to our athletes. So each athlete has their own program on their phone, and the way I adjust the programs are significantly impacted by their functional movement screen testing. So it's somebody that comes in and has, the front side of their body is weak compared to the rest of their body. That impacts how they're stabilizing, how they're creating motion, how they're moving through on the ice, or swinging a bat or a tennis racket, swimming in a pool. All those things are impacted by that weakness. So what we do is we actually factor in corrective exercises to fix the problem, in addition to the training exercises that we have implemented. And a lot of the training exercises that I've implemented are not your traditional, flies and curls and bench press, and because I recognize that there's a limited scope of improvement on those exercises. But instead, break down movement skills. Let's teach you how to side shuffle properly. And let's teach you your first step in side shuffling. Let's teach you your crossover steps and your karaoke. And how do you land from a jump? How do you maintain momentum in a jump? How do you swing the opposite side arm and leg as you're hopping?
Yeah.
How do you, you know, you have backside mechanics where you're pushing when you're accelerating, but you also have frontside mechanics where you're
Mhm.
recovering the arm and the knee forward. Are you generating forward momentum in your acceleration from your frontside mechanics as
Mhm.
well as the push behind you?
Yeah.
And those are the concepts that we work on with our athletes. So when somebody comes into into our facility and they're like, well, where's your squat challenge and your bench press challenge and who lifts the most? And
Yeah.
it's like, well, it's irrelevant.
Yeah.
It's,
Yeah.
we actually, our challenge, what our challenge is in our gym?
Yeah. What's
A
that?
50 and 100 club,
Yeah.
50 sessions and 100 sessions attended in a year.
Mhm. Mhm. Nice.
Because I recognize that the
It's consistency.
consistency and the
Yeah.
attendance is more important
Mhm.
than the actual performance. You could be a really good squatter,
Mhm.
right? But at 5'7",
Yeah.
I don't see you being very successful as a basketball player. And yet
Yeah.
that's like, so
Yeah.
we want to make sure that, just because you're really good at squatting doesn't mean that you're good on in your
Yeah.
chosen sport.
Yeah. No, for
So
sure.
it's really important that we have that match, that the atmosphere matches, and the goals that we want our athletes to attain matches what what's actually going to make them successful. So a lot
Oh,
of our exercise choices are all around, what improves the economy of the athlete and how can we best tap into and create an atmosphere for your skills to kind of bubble to the top.
yeah.
If the number one thing that kills number one thing that kills skill is fatigue.
Mhm.
So we obviously, we want to make sure that fatigue is not limiting you, and we want to make sure that you have the physical profile that allows you to perform in your sport to the best of your ability.
Mhm. No, I love that. And one of the things I'll highlight and kind of reinforce and I try to impress upon a lot of the athletes we work with and know, which, I think you did a really good job there highlighting and I'll continue to reinforce is, just like we talked about, like, taking your, athletic career professionally, right? Train professionally, the consistency, the mindset around it. Well, one of the things, and I've heard in different ways, sometimes people downplay like, oh, I don't want to go do a certain program. Like I can work out in my basement at home and like I can just, I'll do my own program. Like, but then they're missing the details of these little details of training, that functional movements, the economy of how you train and how your body moves, is so important. And, I can even speak to it a bit from my own career, like, cause I'm from North Bay, there was no hockey training, like, like place to go, like any of this stuff. Like I started training probably before, just around the functional movement screen. So probably 2000, quite a few years back is when I started doing my training. I had programs, I trained hard in the basement, but I remember being like, 17, 18, 19, I think almost every year I pulled my hip flexor at the start of the year. Like cause I would just, beef up my legs, not properly. And then I'd, go hard and we were like bag skating and doing so much skating at the start of hockey season. And there goes my hip flexor. There goes my groin. And I was plagued for injuries for a while, and then I eventually kind of did some different types of training, and probably not till I went to U of T, which would have been like 2012, that I really started to learn. And I was doing kinesiology as well, so I kind of learned some things and started developing. And I started training hockey players myself. Right, that was one of my first jobs when I was like 19, 20, because there was no one doing it. So I was at my times I was like, well, I might as well do what I would have wanted. So I started to learn some of this stuff to a degree, and then I really started to learn it in 2010, and that really helped me become much more athletic and start doing things like yoga and taking care of my, making my body more functional. And eating and nutrition was a big thing. But it was, understanding and appreciating. And I've always done it, but they didn't have the opportunity necessarily in North Bay. But I've heard lots of people there, they don't always appreciate the details of how you train. And so obviously you kind of offer that in your online programs and then use that then programs, and they're all personalized at your gym. But I think that's always an important message for people. They misunderstand and underplay or downplay the importance of having a very individualized program that has that level of detail. Because again, you want to be a professional. You're not going to get there doing training on your own with no level of guidance from somebody, unless they're going to go study all this stuff for themselves and spend the tens and decades of years you spent studying it and tweaking with it, right? And other people have as well. So you can kind of like get access to it pretty quick. So I definitely encourage the athletes and people listening to make sure they understand that part of the mindset, because I thought you just touched on it well. Like there's so many little nuances there, and you can try to figure it out all on your own. Like I don't really recommend that. You want to treat yourself like a professional and have that mindset. This is part of it, and making sure what you're doing in your training is right, because you can have the right mindset but then do the wrong things, like you said, and you, like me, you end up pulling your groins and actually causing problems for yourself. And so I wanted to make sure I highlight that, because I think that's such a key message. I'm not sure if you want to touch on any more of that, but I'm sure you've had some parents maybe and times you see that, and if you want to speak to that, feel free.
Oh, absolutely. I had a great example of a young guy, Nick Crawford,
Mm-hmm.
who was drafted to Saginaw. And so we worked. It was actually kind of a neat. So he played for the Don Mills Flyers in his
Mm-hmm.
minor midget year. And
Yeah.
for some scheduling reason, I still remember this. We had the whole team training with us, and Coach Steve Mercer scheduled the team in to train with us they had 17 straight days off. And so we went 3 days on, a day off, 3 days on, a day off, and he actually backed off on his on ice stuff. So here's a
Mm-hmm.
AAA club sitting in 8th place with
Yeah.
a 17-day gap from like the 1st of January through to the 18th.
Oh wow.
And we went hard with these kids.
Mm-hmm.
First round of the playoffs, they knocked off the number one team in their age category.
Wow.
They knocked off the second place team in the second round, and they
Mm-hmm.
won the GTHL.
Yeah.
By physically dominating kids. And it was just that idea that in those 2 weeks, he took what was probably perceived as a huge liability, and he
Mm-hmm.
made it a positive.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the athletes that we had on that team, so that was one thing that kind of stuck in my mind,
Yeah.
visiting Nick's story,
Yeah.
of doing the right things at the right time. So
Yeah.
one of the defensemen on that team was Nick Crawford. He got drafted that year to Saginaw, went and played there. And I worked with Nick he was one of the reasons we got introduced to that team in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd worked with him for 3 or 4 years. And he finished his first year in Saginaw. And I think he played 17-year-old year there as well. And then that summer, he chose to attend a CrossFit facility that was a little closer to his house, a little more convenient,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a level of, I'll call it complacency that kind of crept into his game. He was,
Mm-hmm.
he was the guy. He was playing in the OHL. He had
Mm-hmm.
everything, everything at his fingertips, and did CrossFit for the summer, came back, and in his words, he said, "I had a terrible year."
Mm-hmm.
And he really struggled. He was in his 18-year-old year. This is the year he's supposed to get drafted, and all the pressure's on him. And anyways, at the end of the year, he came back to us and he said, "Okay, you know what? I think I screwed up
Mm-hmm.
last year." He worked with us that following summer. He ended up getting drafted to Buffalo, and
Nice.
anyways, went in and as a 19-year-old. Trained that summer with us, trained another summer, and as a 19-year-old, I'm pretty sure he was OHL Defenseman of the Year, and he was like a
Nice.
quarterback on Barrie,
Yeah.
traded to Barrie, and one of the keys to I think it was Petrangelo was his defense partner,
Yeah.
and the keys to their power play was the play of their defenseman,
Mm-hmm.
and so, no light was, no vast amount of skills were bestowed upon him in the year that we worked with him. We
Yeah.
just simply went back to working on the things that got him to the level he was at, and we let his
Mm-hmm.
skill do the rest.
Yeah.
And when he went out, he just trained, and he just randomly did his CrossFit, and that's what it is: random exercise done to fatigue.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and so when he did random stuff, he got random results. And
Mm-hmm.
when he focused on his training, and he did the specifics that he needed to work on, or
Mm-hmm.
the exercises highlighted those things that he was having difficulty with,
Mm-hmm.
all of a sudden he enjoyed the success that he was looking for on the ice.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, that's a great example. So, no, I definitely appreciate you sharing that. And I know, like, a big thing again is training and being professional and appreciating it, but then it's like doing it right, right? Like I definitely CrossFit. I don't think I've ever really done it myself, but you can just see, like, it's just about going really hard, get your heart rate up and do a bunch of stuff. But which I guess can be good in some ways, but you're trying to be, a specific athlete in a specific sport. It doesn't mean, you're athletic, right? And one of the things I'm sure you can also speak to is the importance of multi-sports and being and obviously these functional movements and economy of movement is what being an athlete's all about, right? It's not always the strongest, beefiest guy, right? Like it's like, there's lots of great examples. I was doing actually a real funny one, maybe I don't know, 7 years ago in my wife's hometown. There's like some Olympic little game, and there was like a tug of war competition. And it was like one-on-one, and I'm not like a huge jack guy, and I was going up against some like pretty jack guy. I was like, it's like, let's see what I could do here, and I beat the guy. And I was like, because like, but I've done like tons of obviously training and things. Anyways, I don't know if that's tooting my own horn here, but about being an athlete versus being looking like you're jacked and being really big, right? So it's much more about being an athlete, and it's not about having, I know they talk a lot about now, like in hockey, it's like you don't want to have like suitcases on your arms and just extra things. But I'm not sure if you want to speak to just the concept of athleticism and other sports, and like kind of go back to one of the things you said, like undoing the damage of the sport. And that's one of the benefits to playing multiple sports, I'm sure, is helping that your body's not overtraining in one certain way. It's developing more athleticism, different movements that probably help increase that functional movement and economy of movement. So if you want to speak to that, I think
Yeah,
that'd be interesting.
definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. I mean, I can honestly say, I remember getting, we were doing, just some promotional stuff for a business, and ended up speaking with Steve Spott. At the time, he was coaching the Kitchener Rangers.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, we weren't trying to get specific in terms of, hey, make sure you guys, send your guys to gym and train with him. I just asked him generally, like, what are the best athletes that you have coming into your program?
Mm-hmm.
And so he wrote us back this testimonial, and it was really kind of clear that he had a number of guys in his stable over the 3 or 4 years that he was coaching Kitchener that were hockey centric.
Mm-hmm.
And invariably, he said 9 out of 10 of those guys were never his best players on the ice,
Mm-hmm.
but the players that had those adjuncts, those other sports that they played in the off season or had played as a youth. And then at a certain point, they chose hockey being their primary sport, and
Mm-hmm.
they're kind of the number one focus for their time. That background of athleticism
Mm-hmm.
enabled them to be the better players on the team.
Mm-hmm.
And it really speaks to when you do something and only one thing,
Mm-hmm.
after a while, that's the only thing you can do.
Mm-hmm.
And it one of the biggest mistakes that people make, I think, in youth sports
Mm-hmm.
is they look at an element that they want in their athlete. So
Mm-hmm.
parents says, well, my athlete needs speed. So
Mm-hmm.
what I'm going to do as a skating athlete, I'm going to hire a track coach to work with my son.
Mm-hmm.
And I had, at one point, I had 6 guys who were drafted to the Florida Panthers.
Mm-hmm.
And all 6, we came in, we actually tested the whole rookie camp that year. And their strength coach stepped in and kind of bigfooted us out of the way and said, okay, I'm going to train all 6 of these guys because I'm going to stay in Toronto for the year.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the guys, these were 6 guys that have been with us for years.
Mm-hmm.
And anyways, we had the players ended up going down to U of T and training with us, this coach, for the summer.
Mm-hmm.
One of the players was Sean Matthias, who had been basically traded for Todd Bertuzzi and from Detroit to Florida. And he was going into, I think it was second or third year in Florida's system.
Mm-hmm.
And he was told, you have our 4th line center position. This was back in March or April when they had their year-end meetings. It's yours. Come into camp, make sure you're in shape. We're expecting you to play in this role next year. And, away you go. So then he performs his summer training, and the style of training that they did was sprint training.
Mm-hmm.
It was all sprint mechanics. It was all, done, again, like you said, the attention to detail just wasn't there. It was all done as a, speed is a predominant factor that we want to have our athletes attain. So I'm going to train like a sprint coach.
Yeah.
And Sean came back in. He lost his position on the team that year.
Mm-hmm.
And when I met up with him the following summer, because they basically got rid of that coach, when I met up with him, he was so angry because he said, Jim, I got back on the ice and I literally felt like I was running on my skates. I had no push. I had a complete inability to turn, and I had no ability to, use my edges. I felt like I was, completely uncoordinated in the skill set that I needed to play my game. And
Mhm.
and Sean, I mean, Sean was a power forward and
Mhm.
played, very, you know, speed. Speed was definitely an asset for him, but so
Yeah.
was his shiftiness and his board work
Yeah.
and his footwork under, around the puck. And for him, he really recognized how important not focusing on one simple concept and
Yeah.
running with it to the end of the earth played. And because he was so angry, like he was so mad. But for me, it was, it was kind of a learning curve,
Yeah.
really reinforcing, yes, this is how important
Yeah.
breaking down and reinforcing all these athletic skills that
Mhm.
you need to call upon when you play your sport.
Mhm.
And you can't take you can't have that blind devotion of, okay, if this is a sprinter and they're fast, then I
Mhm.
must train like that to be fast in my sport, which is a
Yeah.
completely different sport,
Yeah. Mhm.
right? Like I don't see too many sprinters training like hockey players.
Yeah. No. It doesn't make sense.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
yet you have that pervasive mindset in so many
Mhm.
people that
Yeah.
they or they they lack mobility, and they're fairly
Mhm.
tight, and so they
Mhm.
just do yoga for like
Yeah.
3 months of their off season,
Yeah.
and then they wonder why they have no explosiveness,
Yeah. Mhm.
right? Because everything's so slow and controlled. And sure, you gain some range of motion. That's very good. But what
Yeah.
was the reason behind the loss of range of motion in the first place? Was it a
Yeah.
lack of stability? And so
Mhm.
your body tightens up to create that stability so you don't fall down.
Mhm.
If you address the stability issue, the tightness goes away.
Mhm.
But if you just do yoga, you don't develop the aspects that you need in your sport to be the athlete you want to be.
Yeah. 100%. No, those are great examples. And yeah, I just think it's, pretty funny. Think of like players like, and athletes just training just because, oh, sprinters are fast. So I want to be like that. And I would assume that probably even apply to like soccer, basketball, even sports where sprinting is part of it. You don't want to be just a good sprinter. It's, agility, it's, stability. And cause like they got like their lateral movements big in those sports. Right. So, um, and I know like there's a lot of like, in those sports and even in all sports, there's different, they're susceptible to different types of injuries. And so I'm sure a lot of, the way you train and these functional movement things help prevent injuries. Right. So, it's making them more athletic. It's, building them up so that it helps actually not just perform better and increase the performance, but actually decrease the kind of the liability of getting injured. And not sure if you want to speak to that at all. I know that's, an important part to this as well. And again, the importance of the details and how you train, right? I know I remember starting to do like, glute exercises. I never done those until I was like 21 or 22. It's like, the little muscles here and like, helps create more stability and, increase performance, but also, less likely to pull those, certain muscles and more balanced use of your muscles. So, I don't know if you just want to speak to that at all, but
Oh,
the,
absolutely. And
yeah,
it's not just hockey that sport applies to. It's
yeah.
it's looking at your overall durability. I
Mm-hmm.
had one father comment to me. So we had this whole um, soccer organization training with us, and
Mm-hmm.
um, we ended up having this whole very good OPDL team training with us.
Mm-hmm.
But only three of the girls ended up staying with us individually. So their team
Mm-hmm.
would kind of finish their 15, 20 sessions with us, and then they
Yeah.
get into their season.
Yeah.
And three of the girls stayed with us. And
Mm-hmm.
I remember one of the fathers coming to me, and his daughter Isabella would come in, and
Yeah.
she's all banged up, she's bruised, and she's playing midfield, um, and his comments were, Jim, she should be on the sidelines with the other eight girls that are injured
Mm-hmm.
because of the style of game that she plays. They've got
Mm-hmm.
a couple of girls out with ACLs, and soccer players is an absolute epidemic,
Yeah.
and
Mm-hmm.
sprained ankles and collision based injuries as well as overuse injuries. And he's like, but she's not, and
Mm-hmm.
it's because she's only and the three girls that are training with you are the only girls that don't miss time in games. They don't
Yeah.
get hurt.
Mm-hmm.
They get run into at
Mm-hmm.
the same way everybody else does, but they don't get hurt.
Mm-hmm.
For somebody else that gets a significant injury to a muscle group. They get, they strain their hip flexors, their hamstrings, whatever. They just get bumps and bruises, but they're
Yeah.
able to keep going.
Yeah.
And that's the durability. I had another team. What year did they win? I think 2013, 2014. They won the
Mm-hmm.
nationals, and the coach basically came to us afterwards, and he said the number one reason that they were able to play the style of game that they needed to play, and it changed from team to team. You want to play a speed game? Play a
Mm-hmm.
speed game. You want to play a rough and tumble game? We're
Mm-hmm.
going to get down and dirty with you. If you want to play a skills game,
Mm-hmm.
we're going to, we're going to outpace you. We'll last longer than you.
Mm-hmm.
And he said that their ability to adjust to their opposition,
Mm-hmm.
not play a single style, was
Yeah.
totally dependent on this team that had trained with us for 2 years,
Mm-hmm.
twice a week consistently, and probably about half the girls came in for a third session on their own.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just the consistency and the ability level of the girls, that the talent was there,
Mm-hmm.
just like every other team that they faced at the national level.
Mm-hmm.
But the only injuries they had were a broken foot from somebody
Yeah.
getting stomped on
Yeah.
and a broken arm from a fall.
Wow.
You can't
You
prevent
can.
those.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
But
So,
outside of that, every other
yeah.
team had 5 to 7 players sitting on the sidelines, and they're
Hurt. Yeah.
barely at, because it's a game of attrition,
Mm-hmm.
and you're barely able to field the team, and you're
Mm-hmm.
going into the national level, and you're playing against a team that has 2 players on the sidelines, and
Mm-hmm.
the rest of them are ready to play.
Yeah. Yeah, and they're used to playing, and they're used to their systems and adjusting their systems. It's definitely durability is a huge thing, and elite sport, and especially as you keep going up the ranks, it's that's a huge difference. And no, so I was glad you spoke to that. Those are great examples. And again, helping hopefully athletes and people see the connection of the details and their mindset of what does it mean to be a professional and have that attitude and mindset, and how you show up and consistently train, but also then how you train is a huge part of it. So no, I'm loving these examples, Jim. So um, it's it gets me fired up. So what I would also like to kind of maybe dive into, we can go in any ways you want, but maybe just any other kind of comments. Obviously you've worked with now and helped a lot of athletes go to the next level, OHL, junior, NHL. You've worked with a lot of hockey players and other athletes as well in other sports. But maybe just again going back to that first concept of that mindset and the mindset you see them in the gym now, and kind of ways that they're bringing that to your gym and to their training, and how that's you see them actually progress through the career, like pretty much other Mike Fisher stories. I know you have a few of them, but we'd love to hear a couple more if you have some.
Oh, for sure. I think one of the big things is going after it wholeheartedly,
Mm-hmm.
and being so determined to achieve your goal that nothing's going to get in your way.
Mm-hmm.
So way back, I guess it would probably be 2004 or 2005. We had our facility, and we start seeing athletes at around 8:30. I had one athlete that I was working with, and he wanted to work alone. So I agreed with him that we would start at 7:30, and so I would try and get in there at 7 and get some paperwork done, answer some emails and stuff like that. And all of a sudden, he started showing up, realizing I was there at 7. He would show up at 7 to work out, and so that he could finish his workout prior to the other guys being there. So I said, okay, well, I got to get here at 6:30. And when he started to realize that I was getting there earlier, he started showing up at 6:45 and 6:30. And I came to realize that I was not going to beat him
Yeah.
in terms of getting there early. He was
Mm-hmm.
going to match me with everything he wanted to do, because he was so focused on getting his workout done, getting the coaching from me,
Mm-hmm.
and being able to satisfy his need to accomplish his goals those days,
Mm-hmm.
that I just had to roll with it. And I
Mm-hmm.
was going to have to do my emails at some other point in the day. And that was Rick
Yeah.
Nash. And it
Yeah.
was the year that he won the scoring title.
Yeah.
It was unbelievable how dedicated. And I came to realize, you know what, this kid's going somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
This guy is so dedicated to his craft and his success. And we would sit down and discuss his goals, and we would talk about it in terms of this is what he wanted to work on, this is what he wanted to do. And then that was the end of it. Like there was
Mhm.
no negotiation after that where
Yeah.
he would come back to me and say, well, Jim, is this enough? Or there was no second guessing. Like once he
Mhm.
laid out his goals, once we had the plan in place,
Mhm.
it was execute time.
Yeah.
It wasn't, and I have this all the time where I don't know if people want to pat on the back and say,
Mhm.
you're doing a great job,
Mhm.
or it's they need to trust their process once
Mhm.
they establish what the goals are and the process to get from point A to point B.
Yeah.
And it was, it was really very, very interesting to work with Rick because he was so goal oriented. This is what I
Mhm.
want to do. This is how I'm going to do it. This is when I'm going to do it. And he was like, when I first met with him, and he was like,
Mhm.
yeah, I want to, I want to be in the gym before everybody else. I want to be in at 7:30,
Mhm.
going every single day, 5 days a week, all summer long. And I'm
Mhm.
like, okay, but you're a first round NHL pick. Like,
Mhm.
you know, you just, you've got everything at your doorstep,
Mhm.
right? Like, why don't you
Yeah.
come in at 10 with all the other guys?
Yeah. Yeah.
And he's like, no, no,
Mhm.
I don't want to do that.
Mhm.
This is what I want to do. And
Mhm.
it was just, he was so firm and focused on his goals
Mhm.
that it was just unbelievable.
Yeah.
Another, another that kind of example that I had that speaks to that in a very different light is I had a young man that I was working with who was going through a very significant family problem.
Mhm.
To the point that his father was actually banned from all the rinks in the OHL and
Mhm.
had very, very tumultuous family life based on the abuse his father had put towards him.
Mhm.
But if you didn't know Patrick O'Sullivan and
Mhm.
you just talked to him in the gym or you talked to him on the ice or you met him at a rink, you would have
Mhm.
no idea that anything was going on.
Mhm.
Because for him, the rink and his working out and being in his hockey culture and being around his friends, that
Mhm.
was his escape, you know.
Mhm.
And it was really interesting to see how somebody could be so focused on what they wanted to accomplish, and
Mhm.
yet in some aspects of his life have so much trouble going on,
Mhm.
or so much personal stress going on that
Yeah.
it was very difficult to to hear about it and to realize it was going on and to to hear about the different stories that had happened to him and but
Yeah.
at the same sense it was very rewarding to be a part of that that process that helped him get through it.
Mhm. Oh, for sure. Yeah. No, those are both great stories. I know Patrick's story is definitely like it's kind of eye opening and hard to understand. But I think that is a great testament and inspiration for a lot of people to understand. Like you know you can stay dedicated, work through things, and overcome pretty big obstacles in various ways. Um, by if you have that clear plan and dream and you focus on the execution part and whereas because everybody's got a story, right? Everybody's got things that they're they can come up with excuses, right? But you got to learn to overcome that and focus on what you can control. And obviously Patrick's a bit of extreme, but you can hopefully athletes can use that as an inspiration. And obviously, like and then tying that into Rick Nash, I think that's a fantastic example. While is just getting clarity in someone's mind. We talk about mindsets and goal setting and internal motivation is like you've got clear what you want and how you're going to do it, and then it's it's executing consistently that professional mindset again, showing up day in day out. So I think we've really touched on that. I like the word wholeheartedly as well. I don't know if you've ever read Brene Brown's stuff. She's done a lot of good stuff about putting yourself out there and going after what you want. And sometimes a lot of athletes' biggest thing that holds them back is they're worried if they give it their best effort and they fail, then they're like, well, that means I'm a failure. And right, so it's like kind of like they're like self-sabotaging themselves because it's like, well, I didn't give it my best effort, so I didn't really fail, right? And it's like, well, I'm not going to fully try, and it's like kind of like cool model of like, well, I didn't really try, but I still succeeded, or I didn't succeed. It's not a big deal because I didn't. It wasn't like I fully put myself out there. Versus someone that lives wholeheartedly and goes fully after something that they want. It's like, yeah, I'm like Rick Nash. I might fail. I might not be the player I want to be, but I was dedicated to going, and it wasn't going to stop him, right? Because it's not like anybody knows for certainty, like, oh, if I stick to this plan, it will 100% work out. Well, like maybe it won't, right? Like there's but it's like we're not going to focus on that. We're going to focus on that it can, and you have to wholeheartedly go after it because a lot of people do have that dream and then they have a kind of a plan and then they are going after it, but they're like, holding themselves back or not fully going after, not fully executing, as we talked about in a lot of ways. So, I think that kind of, Rick Nash kind of clarity is definitely helpful and a great story. So I appreciate you kind of highlighting those words and those aspects really to your mindset and dedication. And then there's obviously other parts to your game and lots of things you have to work on, but it's all connected, right? Talk about, your physical training, your technical training, your mental training. It's all, connected. You're not going to have one without the other in different ways. So, well, no,
I heard
go
one
ahead.
time that I had somebody, their comment to an athlete was, you need to get out of your own way.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest obstacle to your success is yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I had a player who, in the first 2 or 3, no, I think it was over 2 seasons,
Mm-hmm.
he got cut from the NHL 63 times.
Oh.
It was an unbelievable, like,
Yeah.
his name's Jamie McGinn,
Yeah.
and he, carved out a decent career for himself.
Uh-huh.
And so he was playing in San Jose, and I think it was right after the lockout when they introduced the
Mm-hmm.
salary cap.
Mm-hmm.
And so teams were sending players up and down on their, that they had the ability to send up and down to save money on their cap.
Mm-hmm.
So even though he was, I'm sure he was probably making league minimum or very close to it.
Mm-hmm.
And so the surprising thing about this rule is, in the NHL, when you get sent down to the AHL, you have to physically show up in the city that the team is playing
Mm-hmm.
in order to be considered sent down and then recalled.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't just kind of technically have your paperwork shuffled and you just stay in San Jose and
Mm-hmm.
stay with the team.
Mm-hmm.
Problem is, San Jose's farm team was in Worcester. That's
Mm-hmm.
outside of Boston. So it's a 5 to 6 hour flight,
Oh man.
cross
Yeah.
continent flight,
Yeah.
every time he got sent down. And his schedule was, he would play a game in San Jose,
Yeah.
practice day the next day. He would get sent down that night. So he'd
Yeah.
fly on a red eye back to Worcester.
Uh-huh.
If Worcester had a game the next day, he was playing in the game.
Yeah.
Then 2 days later, San Jose had another game. He would fly to wherever they were,
Yeah.
join the team for the game, would not practice with them other than
Yeah.
the morning skate,
Yeah.
and then get sent down again, or 2 days later get sent down again.
Jeez. Yeah.
So at the end of it, I mean, he had a great vacation with his family at the end of the year on the points that he had, but it was unbelievable to hear how much he had to endure mentally
Mm-hmm.
to basically, because really, like, when you get sent down, you're getting cut, and you
Yeah.
don't know that you're necessarily going to be back in that same situation, right?
Oh.
Like, you go
Mhm.
down, you play a game for Worcester, you sprain your ankle, you
Mhm.
take a puck off the outside of your foot, or
Yeah.
you sprain your wrist, you're taking that chance,
Yeah.
and you're getting paid at the AHL level. You're not getting paid
Yeah.
at the NHL level, and that's
Yeah.
on most guys' contracts, that's a big difference.
Oh
And
yeah.
so for him, just having that mental fortitude to be able to take take it in stride, and to, go to the airport, take that red eye flight, and then get called back up 3 or 4 days later, and
Yeah.
continue to produce at both levels to make sure that you were that guy that they continue to want to pull up.
Mm-hmm.
Other guys could have a big, pity party for themselves,
Oh yeah.
or self-sabotage, in some way.
Mm-hmm.
And to see him have that strength of character, and to, come back in and deal with what he had to deal with to make
Mm-hmm.
sure that he achieved his goal.
Yeah.
Eventually he got to that point in his career where he was a, go-to player on a roster, and getting called up and sent down wasn't a factor anymore.
Yeah, no, that's a great example, and I think that the line of get out of your own way, get out of your own head, right? Like those are key concepts where that applies to like how you train, that applies to how you play, that applies to just your overall mindset. Like and McGinn's situation is very common where guys face adversity, and then how do you respond to it? Do you go into victim mode, sulky mode, and get thrown off, right? The OHL draft just happened, and lots of guys didn't get drafted. How do they respond to that? Or guys didn't get drafted in the round they wanted to. It's probably almost everybody, right? So a lot of guys, everybody wants to go higher. So no matter what the situation is, how do we respond to it? And your mindset is huge to that. And If you're in your own way, then it's going to prevent how you then train. It's going to prevent how you then approach your next workout, or your next shooting or stick handling, or skills practice. And it's going to affect the consistency, and it's going to affect whether you're going to create the right plan. Right. It's that's where, like, right now, like, take a look at junior guys in these years. You'll see great players then just not commit to a plan, and not execute at it, and it's like, phew, they'll fall off the roof, and other guys come out of nowhere because they had a dream and a vision where they wanted to go. They had a clear plan, and then they stick to it, and that's that consistency and those differences. So I think you did a great job highlighting some awesome big stories and examples there, and that helps tie into kind of like the three main factors to performance, and to anyone's career. And that's not just a sport, but we always talk a lot about sport. So no, those are all awesome, Jim. Again, I really appreciate it. I love the stories and examples. And I'll definitely be, hopefully get lots of athletes to listen and hear all of these. Maybe just looking then to start wrapping up, is there any other kind of life lessons and key insights that you maybe want to share with any youth athletes, older athletes, that in all sports, but obviously we have a lot of hockey players listening, that you might want to share?
I would say for most of the athletes that you know I think being realistic about who you are, what your game is, and being honest with yourself is probably the first step in that you can take towards being successful. I think too many players put themselves in situations, or their parents do it. It's not even the players themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So I coach a youth team at the Bantam level, and every year I try and get the message across to the parents of, you're not in the dressing room,
Yeah.
and you don't know what these players know in terms of hockey strategy and hockey execution and our team
Mm-hmm.
plan. You're not the
Mm-hmm.
expert in the room.
Mm-hmm.
Let the expert handle that situation. That expert is your son or your daughter that's playing
Mm-hmm.
for me,
Yeah.
because in that situation they're fully informed. and
Mm-hmm.
and I think for a lot of players, they unfortunately stumble because they put roadblocks up that aren't necessary, and
Mm-hmm.
they self-sabotage, or they put themselves in situations where, hey, why am I not on the number one power play unit? Well,
Mm-hmm.
because your game doesn't complement what the team is trying to do.
Yeah.
Like, you're a stay-at-home defenseman. Your ability level is shutting down the other team's best offense,
Mm-hmm.
right? So be the best penalty killer. Be
Mm-hmm.
the steady guy that your coach wants to be out there in the last 4 or 5 minutes of the game to
Mm-hmm.
shut down the other team when you're up by a goal.
Mm-hmm.
And recognize that when you guys need a goal, maybe you're not the guy that they're going to call upon, but
Mm-hmm.
recognize what your true assets are and
Mm-hmm.
capitalize on them, because you can be a big part of that team, even if you're not the person scoring that goal. Just because you don't score the goal doesn't mean you're not a huge important part of that team function and that team atmosphere.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's one of the biggest things that I see for in youth sports, is
Mm-hmm.
where the dysfunction happens in their mind, and not so much in their execution within their sport itself.
Yeah.
So have a plan, be the best person that you can be the best teammate you can be,
Mm-hmm.
and enjoy the fact that you're there, and don't politicize things. Don't make things more than they are. Don't be a drama queen. Don't make sure
Mm-hmm.
that it's all about you,
Yeah.
because the number one thing that I've seen, uh, and I look back at my time in the OHL, the I talked about those three guys at Sudbury. Like those were three of the nicest guys on the team, and there
Yeah.
were some powder kegs. There were some guys that it was all about them.
Mm-hmm.
They had the whole, prior to the game, they were the one doing the hard lap in front of the crowd, show
Mm-hmm.
how hard they were going to work in the game. And they
Mm-hmm.
had their bucket tipped back, and they were constantly chewing on their mouth guard, and looking
Mm-hmm.
at themselves in the glass. And,
Yeah.
it wasn't about that,
Mm-hmm.
and the, the true players that had success were some of the quietest guys in the room. We
Mm-hmm.
had, when I was in my first year in Belleville, we ended up having a very successful team. that
Mm-hmm.
made it to the conference finals.
Mm-hmm.
And of that whole team, um, there were some big egos
Yeah.
in that team. They had won the OHL championship the year before,
Mm-hmm.
and on that team there was one player that ended up having probably the most success out of the whole team. And yet
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't until 3 years later, walking out of Swiss Chalet, that I met his parents.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Like his
Yeah.
parents just completely distanced themselves from
Mm-hmm.
him. It was his hockey, it was his experience, it was what he
Mm-hmm.
was going to do. They
Yeah.
never even came down to the hallway. They it was
Yeah.
all about, and it was Matt Stajan, and
Yeah.
it was just
Mm-hmm.
such it was such a reward to see him succeed because it was all his.
Mm-hmm.
He was the
Yeah.
quietest guy in the room. He was a leader on the ice only through his effort and his output and his leadership.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it was really really cool to see his career unfold and see what he was able to do because it all came from him.
Yeah. No, 100%. And it goes back to like being honest, realistic, and then like the other word I'd throw in there, taking responsibility for your career, right? Like it's you definitely can't take responsibility if you're not going to be realistic and honest with yourself. And that those are all keys to then creating the right vision and plan. Because if you're not honest and realistic and not taking responsibility, you're not going to create an effective plan at all, let alone be able to execute it. And so I think those are great concepts and words to kind of reinforce and stories and especially for parents too, right? Because parents play a huge role, obviously, growing up and fostering mindsets and helping, give resources and being a guide. But then they can also sometimes, in a way, get in an athlete's, way and hold them back if they're not letting them go and letting them take responsibility. And so those are good lessons for both the athlete and the parent. And I know I've had talked to lots of athletes about that. That's like after a game, they're like, "How do I play?" And they're like, "I wonder what my parents think." No, no, what do you think? Like, you got to own, like, this is your game, not worrying about what everybody else thinks. They have to take responsibility and be honest with themselves. And one of the main concepts, a lot of that is, you want to get out of your own way. You need to learn to look within and find out who you are and get clarity with who you are. And kind of tying it back into like being realistic and honest. You're not going to know who you are if you're not being honest with yourself. So and then you can't take accurate responsibility and move forward. So no, that was a great point to kind of help wrap up and pull it all together. So I'm not sure if you have any other thoughts or comments you want to highlight, but I definitely appreciate it. There's tons of great takeaways out of this. So I'm sure lots of athletes will get lots of great lessons and things to help them keep growing, be realistic and honest with themselves and create plans and kind of use these stories as, kind of help keep them guided on the right path to where they do want to go. So I appreciate all that. Is there anything else you want to maybe just lastly touch on, Jim?
Oh, that was great.
Yeah.
That was
Awesome.
great. I had a great time speaking with you today.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And I'll make sure we have links on our website and stuff too. I know we to your website as well as like you have the online program, and especially now with the whole COVID situation we're currently in that seems to not have a quick end in sight. You obviously are providing a great resource for athletes, and they have I think you still have the 4-week free trial, and so it's so if athletes are interested in that, we'll make sure the links
Yep.
are around, and then other than that. Obviously, maybe we'll have you come on again in a couple of weeks. You're a special guest and have some more Q&A for some of the guys. So I appreciate it, Jim, and we'll be in touch. Thank you very much.
Sounds good. Thanks, Cassie.
Thanks.